thank you very much for coming tonight and turning out on a cold winter's night. My name is Judith Pino. I'm the co-chair of the KEDCO Review Committee, along with my colleague, Councillor Jeff McLaren. I'd like to start by making some introductions, taking a little time to talk about the composition and the scope of our review committee, our meeting schedule, opportunities for further community input, and our desired outcomes. First, I'd like to introduce Brock Dickinson. Brock is the CEO of MDB Insight and one of Canada's leading economic development thinkers, combining 20 years of hands-on experience in the field with the latest ideas, innovations, and research to drive 21st century economic development. Brock has been hired as subject matter expert to help guide the committee and elaborate on industry best practices. And Brock will be facilitating our meeting tonight. The review committee comprises of 10 people, representing the City of Kingston, Councillors Jeff McLaren, Councillor Adam Candon, and our CAO, Gerard Hunt, representing the KEDCO Board of Directors, Bo Wanschneider, myself, and Donna Gillespie, our interim CEO, representing community members, Heather Ford, the owner of Green Acres Inn and the chair of Kingston Accommodation Partners, Michael Harris, who unfortunately is not present tonight, Executive Director of Keys Job Centre, and numerous community-based organisations. Judith Hay, retired elementary teacher and principal, Debbie Wells, officer of the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario, the former president of the Kingston and District Labour Council. The committee was struck with the support of Council to undertake a full corporate review to ensure that KEDCO is delivering strategies of value to the community and aligned with city priorities. The major review items have been identified as 1. The scope, the strategy, direction, and alignment with the City Council priorities. 2, the governance and the operations model. 3, performance matrix, and communication and outreach strategy. In other words, what should we be doing? What activities constitute the best model for economic development in Kingston? How do these activities align with the city priorities? What checks and balances are in place to deliver transparency and accountability? How do we measure success, the return on our investment? And how do we effectively communicate the goals and the milestones? The committee is meeting every 3 weeks. Going forward, January the 27th, February the 17th, March the 9th and the 30th, and April the 20th, with the goal of delivering our final report by the end of April. These meetings take place here in Innovation Park, but actually in the boardroom just off the lobby. We start at 4 o'clock, and every meeting has a scheduled time allocation to meet with delegations or individuals who wish to address the committee. The meeting is open to the public, and we hope that all people that come to address the committee will stay and listen to the debate. So, what are the desired outcomes? What's the end game? What do we hope to achieve? Clarity on the activities we ask our economic development organisation to perform. A measurement system that quantifies results. A governance and operations model that delivers transparency and accountability. A communication strategy that satisfies the community's right to know. So thank you. With that, I'll hand you over to Brock.
At any point anybody has any difficulty hearing as we work through the evening, just let me know and we'll see what we can do to sort of balance the volume and the sound. We want to be fairly relaxed in terms of how we approach this evening. I've been asked to make a little bit of a presentation at the front end to talk about what economic development is and the kinds of things that economic developers are worried about or are thinking about these days. But the bulk of the session is really sort of focused on an opportunity to hear input from all of you. We have some questions prepared. Some of you have posed questions as well, and over the course of the evening, we're really going to try to open it up and give the opportunity for some open dialogue, for some honest exchange of questions, ideas, information. We may not be able to answer all of the questions this evening. Certainly all of the questions we receive will be answered, and the review committee will post the answers to these questions on a website. But to the greatest extent possible, we'll try to kind of provide all the responses and all the information tonight as we work through this. I have some questions prepared to pose back to you, but that's only if we don't sort of go off in other directions, that this is really meant to be your opportunity and your occasion to kind of bring ideas and thoughts and suggestions forward. And so as we work through the evening, we'll try to find that balance between some of the things that have come forward formally and some of the things that you have on your mind that you really want to talk a little bit about as well. Now, just by way of background, I got a call from the mayor last fall saying we're striking a review committee to look at KEDCO and to try to understand where it or some similar structure or some opportunity needs to go in the future. We want to sort of not close off any of the options for what this committee can discuss, and we want somebody who can provide some economic development advice and insight. You've got a panel of community members and representatives who are the ones who will ultimately come up with the recommendations. But if they have questions about economic development, what is it? How does it work? What are the best practices? What do other communities do? What has worked in other places that we could learn from? There needs to be somebody who can kind of be a resource to help answer some of those questions and provide guidance and input to the committee as it moves along. And so that's my role. I'm attending all of the meetings and working with the committee, but not technically a member of the committee, because we want to ensure that the response that comes forward is from the community and not from some expert who happens to come from somewhere else. Having said that, I'm the Chief Executive Officer of a company called MDB Insight, and the map that you've got up on the screen shows some of the communities around the world where we do work. Our firm specializes in economic development consulting. It's all we do, economic development. And in the course of doing this, we're about 8-9 years old at this point. We've grown to become the largest company in Canada specialized in this space. And I always want to point out as part of this process that we have a number of offices across the country, in Calgary and Toronto and Hamilton. But from the outset, we've always had an office in Kingston as well. And we, as a company, have chosen to invest in this community. And we're also very interested and very concerned about where this community goes from an economic development perspective. At the same time, I wear a second hat, and this is where we'll go for the first few minutes. I'm the director of the Economic Development Program at the University of Waterloo. So provide training to all of the professional economic developers across the country as they go for their professional certification. And so over the next few minutes, as I talk a little bit about what economic development is today and the kinds of issues that an economic development organization confronts, this is sort of the crash course that we often give to our master's students, sort of the professional students. So we're going to explore a few ideas just to give a little bit of context to where we go. Now, economic development is one of those things that we've actually been doing for about a century. We can go back to 1914. The state of Wisconsin established an industrial commission. It was really the first economic development organization in North America. But a lot of the way that we practice economic development really began in the 1920s in the state of Georgia, when an electrical utility named Georgia Power decided, like all good companies do, that it wanted to generate larger profits. It decided that the best way to do this was to kind of understand from amongst all its clients who it was that used the most electricity. The biggest electricity users paid the biggest electricity bills, so if the company could find more users like that, they'd make bigger profits. And no surprise, in 1920s Georgia, the biggest users of electricity were factories. And so Georgia Power set up a sales division to go around the world and try to convince factories to move to Georgia. Now, this was a hugely successful strategy. Lots of factories relocated to Georgia in the 1920s and 1930s, and it didn't take long for other utilities to catch on to this. And not too long after, municipalities began to look at this model as well. In the 1930s and 40s, we see municipalities getting into this same space. Now, they weren't interested in generating larger profits like Georgia Power was, but they were interested in finding ways to generate more tax revenues. And if you could convince a factory to come to your community, you could generate those revenues, and you could use those to pay for more community amenities, to lower everybody else's taxes, so you have new money flowing into the community to do all kinds of things. And through the 1950s and 60s, through the great period of industrial expansion in North America, this was what we did in economic development. It was sometimes called smokestack chasing. This notion that you go outside the community and bring something in as a way to drive economic development. And this was a hugely successful strategy for many years. We began to sort of focus in on things like investment attraction. How do we convince companies to come to our community? We talked a lot about investment readiness. How do we work inside the community to make sure we're ready to welcome that new investment, that we have the right responses in place? We talked about employment lands development. If we want to have factories come to our community, do we have the right land for them? Is it serviced? Is it zoned the right way to accommodate those investments? And this was what we did in economic development for most of the 20th century. But things began to change a little in the 1970s. The poster child for this change that's often sort of referred to as Flint, Michigan. Now, Flint's in the Detroit area, and Detroit, of course, was very successful at attracting factories in the 20th century. Flint was no exception to that. But beginning in the 70s, many of those factories in Flint began to shutter their doors and close down. And at first, the community said, well, no problem. We'll use our economic development department to just go recruit some more factories. But there weren't the same number of opportunities that there had been in the past. And soon, many of the workers, as those factories began to crumble and decay, began to say, well, I don't think there's a lot of new opportunities coming here. What else could I be doing? I don't see any other jobs in this community. Maybe I should move somewhere else. And so they often put their houses up for sale in preparation for moving to another community. But who wanted to move to Flint? There's no jobs there. Stuff's falling apart. It's starting to look pretty bad. And so then the workers were confronted with this challenge of, well, do I abandon my house and go somewhere else to look for work? Or do I stay here with no future employment prospects? And in fact, many of the people in Flint did begin to abandon their homes. The story of Flint is the story of Detroit, of Pittsburgh, of Philadelphia, of Rochester, of Syracuse, and of Buffalo. There's a sense that many American communities were beginning to hollow out in the face of a change in economic development. This strategy, this smokestack chasing approach that had worked so well for so many years, wasn't producing the results that we wanted. 20 years ago, Detroit had a population of almost 2 million people. Today, the population is less than 700,000. The abandoned sections of Detroit are larger than the city of Vancouver. And one of the major economic development strategies that Detroit is pursuing these days is urban agriculture. How do they reclaim some of these lands for agricultural purposes? Now, we say it's easy for us to kind of look across the border and pick on Flint and Rochester and Buffalo and places like this and say, oh, they got it wrong. The reality is we've struggled a lot with this in Canada as well. One of the things that our firm produces on a monthly basis is what we call our Employment Development Index, where we look at job creation or job loss year over year for every community across the country. And in places where we've created jobs, we show a green circle. And in places where we've lost jobs, we show a red circle. First, the good news. This is from the height of the last recession, so this is not the most recent. The December Employment Index will come out probably tomorrow, and we'll have some more recent figures there. But it suggests that, while it's easy to kind of look at Detroit or these places and say they got it wrong, that we've really been struggling to try to understand what we should be doing in economic development as well. And that many of the traditional strategies and approaches that we've used have not been working. So in the 1980s and 1990s, this prompted a really big rethink of what economic development is all about. We began to study this in a much more systematic way to say, well, how do we create development at the local level? And a lot of the work showed that jobs weren't actually being created in the places that we traditionally thought they were. It wasn't necessarily smokestack chasing that led to the best economic development results. The chart that's up on the screen comes from a consulting firm out of Chicago. It's an average of the numbers coming from 300 communities across North America, including a number of Canadian communities. And this was part of a study in the 90s that showed where jobs in a community are actually created. Now, the blue slice up there at the top, 15% of all new jobs in a community come from that smokestack chasing activity, that notion that we can bring investment from somewhere else and it's going to create jobs in our community. But the surprising result was the orange piece of that pie. Fully 76% of all new jobs in the typical community are created by companies that are already located in that community. Companies that have already chosen to be there, have chosen to invest in that place, and that becomes the major driver of job creation and economic development. So in the 90s, we began to say, okay, if that's what's happening, maybe we need to change the way that we do things. Rather than being focused just on attracting investment from somewhere else, we need to think about how to nurture and support the companies inside our community. So many communities launched corporate calling programs. Those of you who are business owners here know that your favorite words are always, I'm from government and I'm here to help you, right? It's that sort of sense that we were suddenly rushing out to try to engage with business. We found that that wasn't necessarily the most successful approach, but over time we arrived at this tool called BR&E, Business Retention and Expansion. Can we work with local businesses to retain them, to keep them in the community, to make sure they don't fail, or to help them expand, to help them grow and bring new jobs on stream? And BR&E looks for a number of things. Can we find signs within companies in the community that they may fail or they may be laying staff off? Are there signs that they may choose to leave town? Are there signs that they have opportunities for expansion? Or if we're meeting with different companies and learning about them through this kind of a BR&E process, how do we group them together to collaborate for economic development opportunities? And all of this sort of discussion led in the 90s to a new notion of economic gardening. Rather than smokestack chasing, the idea was consider your local economy to be some kind of a garden that has to be nurtured and supported over time to grow in interesting ways, and that growth comes from inside the community rather than outside. And so economic developers began to worry and work on things like downtown redevelopment, tourism development and marketing if tourism was a major industry in their community, support for entrepreneurs, export development. Dayton, Ohio, for example, has made export development one of the key focuses of their economic development work. Community vitality, how do we create a healthy community? These are very vague terms, but often it led to things like, well, our community doesn't have enough physicians. That's going to make it hard for companies to locate here or to start up here. So how do we get involved in sort of bringing some of those people to our community, filling some of those gaps or some of those holes at the community level? And workforce development. How do we ensure that workers have access to jobs and that employers have access to the kinds of workers with the right sets of skills? And workforce development, as we got into the early 2000s, became suddenly a major focus of economic development discussion. A lot of this shift was driven by a guy named Richard Florida, who's at the University of Toronto, who wrote a book called The Rise of the Creative Class. He was talking about a kind of a new class of creative knowledge workers. I got to admit, the first time I heard the expression the creative class, I thought about, singers and dancers and acrobats and that sort of thing. And that's not what Florida is talking about. For him, the creative class are people who use their mind as their principal work tool rather than, say, muscles or machinery. And in looking at this creative class, Florida found that, if we go back 100 years or so, we had some members of the creative class in our communities. We had architects, we had engineers, we had religious leaders, that sort of thing. There was always some people in our community there. But by the end, there was about 10% of the total workforce was in that creative class. By the end of the Second World War, that had risen to about 15%. By the end of the 1980s, that had risen to 20% of the workers in our communities. And today, if we look across the industrialized world, about 1/3 of all workers are employed in the creative class. And those 1/3 of all workers earn about half of all the wages paid. So from an economic development perspective, that's kind of interesting. We've got this sort of growing segment of the economy, and it's a highly compensated segment of the economy. This prompted economic developers, maybe for the first time, to start to think about talent and skills and the human resources within their community as one of those things that they really needed to focus their attention on. Richard Florida talked about this at one point, saying that what we're really talking about is the fact that the world became spiky. We could take any skill set, the number of PhDs in a community, the number of MBAs, the number of plumbers, the number of nursing practitioners. And if you put all those people on a map, they would be more concentrated in some communities. They would create a spike on the map where talent was concentrated in certain areas. This meant that, if you're an employer looking for a certain kind of employee, you're more likely to go where that talent is concentrated. A couple of Swedish economists probably described this phenomenon best. Jonas Ridderstråle and Kjell Nordstrom wrote in their book, Funky Business, the most critical resource for any company, for any community, wears shoes and walks out the door at 5 o'clock every day. We talk a lot about the knowledge economy. And this is really what we're talking about, that suddenly the way in which we compete for economic development activity changed. In the 1950s, we said, we've got cheap land in our community, you should come here. By the 70s, we'd sort of shifted to, well, we've got really low taxes, you should come to this community. In the 90s, it was all about, well, we've got cheap labor, we're the best place you could possibly come. If you're a Microsoft or a Google or a Yahoo or somebody like that, you really want to go where the taxes are cheapest or where the land is the least expensive? No, you want to go where you can access the kind of skills and talent to grow your company and to be successful. And so economic developers have had to think more and more about how human resources and the skills and talents in a community lead to economic development opportunities. This has led to perhaps the most recent shift in economic development. In 2011, a group of researchers at the National Bureau for Economic Research in the States released a report called Who Creates Jobs? Small versus large versus young, where they really tried to say, at the level of the community, who is it in 2016 that actually creates jobs? And the finding of their research was that young companies are the primary drivers of job creation. In fact, since the year 2000 in the United States, all net new jobs have been created by companies less than 5 years old. Larry Walters at the University of Waterloo, he's an economist there, has done similar research suggesting that the same thing is true of Ontario. Young companies are driving job creation in this new economy. When we think about how young companies form and grow, and the dominant model these days is what's often sort of thought of as the garage startup. It's the individual entrepreneur who has an idea and who bootstraps it up from nothing in their garage. And economic developers have said, why should they be left alone in their garage? Surely there are programs and structures and systems we can put in place to help those garage startups be more effective. And often we refer to these as incubators, like the facility we're in tonight. The first incubator was started in Batavia, New York back in 1959, but they have since grown to become a major feature of economic development activity. This is the Research Triangle Park in North Carolina, which has created more than 150,000 jobs in the last few decades. The Technopolis incubator in northern Finland, in Oulu, which took a decaying industrial town and turned it into a major center of the IT industry. We often talk about the success of Waterloo in economic development, and it's in part through the incubators in Waterloo and Kitchener that they've really begun to drive some of that activity. And so this has reshaped where economic developers go and the kinds of activities that they're involved in. Just one last set of issues I wanted to kind of explore a little bit before we kind of move on to more discussion as we think about the background. We've talked about how economic development has evolved over the course of a century and how the range of things that economic developers do has in fact sort of grown and expanded over time. If we look across Ontario, we also see that there are a number of structures that are typical of economic development organizations. When communities think about how to do economic development, they create agencies or departments or corporations to carry that out. And I want to take a moment just to kind of describe the structures we often see in Ontario. And there's really three kinds that I want to take a quick look at. The first is what's known as a kind of a super regional structure, where dozens and dozens of communities gather together to collaborate around economic development. And one of the classic examples of this is the Ontario East Economic Development Corporation, where basically more than 100 communities across Eastern Ontario come together to share some of their resources around economic development activity. KEDCO and Kingston are a part of the Ontario East Group, but essentially the Ontario East Group often sort of collaborates around things like trade shows and some of that investment attraction activity. Structure that we see frequently across the province is what's perhaps best known as a two-tier economic development structure. The example I want to talk about is the region of Waterloo, but we see these in Eastern Ontario as well. The Prescott-Russell region has this. Durham region, closer to Toronto, has this. There are certain sections of the province where there are overlapping levels of government and often overlapping economic development organizations. So in the region of Waterloo, for example, there is a regional government that has a regional economic development agency. But there are also 7 individual municipalities inside the region, the City of Waterloo, the City of Kitchener, the City of Cambridge. And many of those individual municipalities have economic development structures as well. So you end up in communities where there are 2 levels or 2 layers of economic development service delivery. This creates a big question around who does what. How do you divide up the responsibilities in a 2-tier structure? And often we sort of see different programs migrate in different directions, that the upper or regional tier will often be involved in things like investment attraction or investment marketing or collecting data for the whole region, while that local tier will be involved in more street-level kinds of activities, business retention, downtown redevelopment, those kinds of things. Where Kingston sits is in what we would call a one-tier structure. There are not two tiers of economic development service here. You have a single economic development organization that serves the entire community. And one of the things that that means is that when we think of that broad range of activities, everything from tourism to downtown development to investment attraction to business retention and expansion to working with entrepreneurs to incubation, all of these things start to fall under the mandate because if KEDCO doesn't do them, there's no other economic development organization to sort of be a part of that process. Doesn't mean that KEDCO has to lead on all of these things, but there aren't necessarily other players to come there. That's very different than that two-tier structure where there's sort of a much smaller mandate. KEDCO tends to have a mandate that has become quite large. And that,
sorry, Rob.
yeah.
For clarity, you said when KEDCO and Kingston, you've divided it into two different things. So could you explain how that fits when you're saying it's a one-tiered structure? I'm sorry, but I'm sitting here going, I'm writing down what you're saying. KEDCO and Kingston went A, and yet you're calling it a one-tiered thing.
So I have one or two slides left before we move into discussion, and this is the last item that I wanted to talk on, is this notion of governance. And how does the notion of the city relate to an arm's length corporation like KEDCO? And what we see in one-tier structures is that there are two ways of sort of organizing the governance structure. One is to make your economic development operation a department of the city. You know, sort of think KEDCO doesn't exist as an organization, but there's a series of staff inside City Hall that carry out the economic development function. The other possibility is like KEDCO, as you have currently, is an arm's length corporation that's sort of structured as an independent body. Now, there are pluses and minuses to both of those kinds of approaches. When you bring the structure inside City Hall, there are ways in which it has a higher level, perhaps, of day-to-day accountability. There's sort of more ongoing contact with political leadership, for example, that can sort of maintain the community sort of perspective on things. But that also comes with disadvantages. That suddenly you're more subject to a piece of legislation called the Ontario Municipal Act, for example, which limits the kinds of economic development activities you can be involved in. We often find that economic development departments that are located inside a city structure are slower in their responses than the business community might like. There's not as much nimbleness there. The arm's length corporations tend to be nimbler, faster. They're often able to access funding from other agencies, other levels of government, from other sources. But they give up sometimes some of that day-to-day accountability to the political leadership of the community. And so this is one of those issues that communities across Ontario are currently struggling with. Waterloo has recently chosen to take their external arm's length corporation and bring it inside the city. There are other communities that have gone the opposite approach. The City of London, for example, has been moving some of its internal operations out to external structures. And so we see that the kinds of issues, the kinds of questions that you're raising here in Kingston are not necessarily different than the kinds of questions that other communities all across Ontario are wrestling with. I know that this brief presentation may raise as many questions as it answers, but hopefully it gives us at least a little bit of a common background, a common sense of some of the issues that we're struggling with, the range of things that economic developers are involved in. And I guess from here, what I really want to do is kind of start to turn the floor over to you. I've got some questions here, but I think one of the first things, we've got sort of 3 or 4 key areas we were hoping to kind of work through tonight. And the first is around the question of accountability and transparency. We understand from the community survey work that's been done and from the input of many of the organizations, some of you are here this evening, that these are some of the key concerns the community is feeling when it comes to KEDCO and that it wants addressed in the review process. But when I think about things like transparency or accountability, I mean, those are fairly broad terms. So can we spend a little bit of time sort of chatting a little bit more about, where you'd like to see this picked up by the review committee? When we think about those kinds of issues, what is it that you most want to see the committee wrestle with as they think about the future of KEDCO?
Sure, I'd say probably the top.
So do we need a microphone or can everybody hear?
I will speak loudly.
Perfect.
When people talk about accountability, I think part of it is, what is the budget? How is the budget followed? And can we audit the results? It's pretty simple, and I think the problem is this is the budget that will happen. Next year, this is the budget that will happen. And having that broken down and showing where it goes for different elements, what is done for local retention, what is done for new business, And particularly in the case where we have this tourism versus business split, and what is the definition? And then if we do have that budget, which may not be to the granularity of individuals, but we say we have this much money going towards personnel, this much money going towards trips and events, and here's the results on a quarterly, monthly, trip, or area basis. Because right now, there's one big pool and no answers. So you can say that, you know, transparency is a broad term, granted, but something as simple as a budget, results, accountability, simple.
So as you see the transparency, accountability questions, that financial one is the sort of the one that's at the forefront of that set of questions?
Well, I mean, it's very much tied into what are the results. I mean, it's all very well to say that we went to 16 events and say, okay, if we had 16 new jobs, well, was it a result of the event? Was it just pure luck? And where are they? Where do they fit within the hierarchy of the types of jobs? How much is tied to some metrics? And I think that even if you started with 2 or 3, you would make most people in this room happy, as opposed to what effectively feels like 0.
And there was a hand here. Are you in agreement with that sort of approach?
Well, what I wanted to do is go back to this while you still have it up there. You said that we were a 1 tier. Okay. Earlier on the map, you showed that there was a Y Eastern Ontario Economic Development Corporation. So that's your upper tier, right?
No. What?
Couldn't we put the KEDCO back in Kingston at the lower level?
Yeah.
And then instead of at arm's reach, they would be the lower level, lower tier, Eastern Ontario Economic Development Corporation, upper tier.
Yeah, the 2-tier structures tend to exist in a region where there are 2 levels of government. And so in Eastern Ontario, while there is this kind of regional association, there's no Eastern Ontario government to kind of fund or finance that upper tier. So this is really, the Eastern Ontario group is kind of a voluntary association of all of the economic development agencies within the region. They collaborate together to work effectively. There's no funding from that level to kind of finance an economic development organization. It all comes from the member organizations as they pool their resources to work together. Really, when we look at economic development service delivery, we call Kingston 1 tier because you only have 1 level of government in Kingston. There is no regional government in addition to your city government. There's really just one level of local government and 1 economic development agency as a result.
But that could be housed within the city or under their umbrella, and then we could access the larger one when we need it.
So you could, in theory, KEDCO could move inside the city. It could become a department of the city of Kingston, and it could still be a member of that Eastern Ontario Association. That way some of the other members are inside city departments, so there's nothing to prevent that from occurring. Yeah. Question here? Or contribution?
On the issue of money,
Please, yeah.
transparency and accountability. First of all, I'm extremely surprised in 2016 we are raising that question. One would have thought the city council, the city mayor, the board of directors would already know that when public funds are spent, there is a need for an excellent transparency to the public. The reason why we are discussing this, one of the reasons, is the accountability, I believe, is misplaced. I am a relatively unrelenting critic of KEDCO. I have been for a while. But now I come to realize that the greater degree of responsibility lies with the board of directors and the city council for allowing these things to go on in the fashion they have and for as long as they have. So the power of the mandate on transparency, governance, and accountability must include, is the city council accountable for the money that's not well spent that's given to KEDCO? Is the board of directors accountable? And defining accountability, what does it actually mean? Will the board resign? Will some councillor resign? Accountability cannot just be a word. It can't just be a promotion of thought. It has to be accompanied by action. And as far as economic development is concerned, in regard to accountability, in my opinion, there's only one thing that matters. That's the tax revenues. Jobs don't matter. If the city's coffers are not made bigger year after year by economic activity and economic efforts, all that effort is useless. Because my life is not going to change if the total tax revenue in the city next year is the same as this year. If an organization like KEDCO adds to the city's coffer, I'm for it. It means in the mandate of accountability, tax revenue should feature, not job creation.
Excellent. Thank you very much. What I may do, that notion of what is economic development for? Is it tax revenues? That's a question I want to come back to in a few minutes' time. But if we can build on the accountability side of this and continue that accountability transparency discussion for a few more minutes, and I promise we'll come back to that question of why do we do economic development?
So you showed two examples of management structures, one under the city and one, I'll do my best, but I don't think
Right.
You just showed us two examples of possible management structures. One, a committee held under the city, and then the other in arms like corporation. Do you have any examples of structures that involve RFPing the management of the corporation so that we can review and hold accountable and look for better ideas coming from outside the community or even within the community?
Yeah, there are examples of contracting economic development services out, but generally not in Canada. But we see that fairly often in the United States. The other thing we see sort of corresponding to that in the U.S. is that there's often a high level of private sector contribution to the economic development organization. Normally, if that service is contracted out, where we see it end up is probably with the local Chamber of Commerce, that they become a structure that delivers economic development services. That kind of arrangement is really rare in the Canadian context.
We do have an example.
West,
we do have an example in Kingston already with the K-Rock Center,
right,
using the management structure. So we have an example to follow.
Yeah, in terms of other operations, yeah, I'm not aware of a lot of economic development agencies that have done that, but certainly, yeah, there are other kinds of activities where it's been demonstrated as an effective approach. Yeah, absolutely. There's another comment, a couple of rows behind you there.
I don't need it. Fundamental question.
Oh, sorry, if I can. Apparently there are people listening to this online, so we do need the microphone so that they can hear the questions asked as well.
I have a
My apologies to those online.
much more fundamental question. We hear a lot of buzzwords, and City Council has done a really good job of promoting those buzzwords, and you used two of them, accountability and transparency. Those are great words. I don't know what the hell they mean, but they're great words. In my business, the only person I'm accountable to is Revenue Canada. I pay taxes. And I pay taxes based on profit, hopefully, that I report, that are reviewed by my accountant, who are a third party. How is it possible, you know where I'm going with this, how is it possible that we can promote accountability when we're auditing ourselves?
Let's reflect on this, that I started by saying accountability and transparency are great words. So how would you propose then, I mean, this is our chance to hear from you, how would you propose a kind of a third-party oversight on some of that relates to, I think we had the notion of reporting and performance measurement and sort of, you know, can we demonstrate results from some of that?
It's pretty simple.
How would you do that?
You've got 10 people on a review committee. None of those 10 people can be involved in any way with KEDCO operations, period.
There's no objectivity here. They can't be objectively reviewing their own selves.
Apparently there are 7 out of the 10 that have no connection whatsoever to KEDCO. Is that true? Is that true? We need to know that. Is that true?
So that's my understanding is we have 3 from the city, we have 3 from KEDCO, and that the balance is made up of people who applied from the community and were selected from the mayor's office is how the committee was established.
People have never been involved with KEDCO, had nothing to do with KEDCO.
Do any of the committee members like to talk about any past involvement? Yeah.
I was on the board of directors of KEDCO for 6 years. And I was the chair of the finance and audit committee, which is why I put my name forward to you. I felt that as someone who leans a little to the left, as somebody who represents labor and works to, protect my members, that they're teachers. I felt that I brought a very different point of view to KEDCO. When I applied to be on the review committee, I felt, okay, I have criticisms of KEDCO, but I don't necessarily want to trash KEDCO. I could bring some constructive criticisms. I felt that when I put my name forward to be on the review committee, when I applied to be on the review committee, I thought I was applying to a city committee. But it isn't. I'm not sure that doesn't mean that the review won't be honest, but I think that my role is a little different than what I thought it was going to be.
Well, would you be willing, as a member of the review committee, to look at the financials, which I took off the KEDCO site, but we need more detail. Like, we have here travel, 101,000 for 2014. Like, okay, you traveled, or whoever went, but what did you bring anything back to our community that would, for our investment of $2.6 million, did we get a return from all that travel?
Yeah.
Like,
So
I know, but
the
are we
committee's
ever
met once.
going to get to see that as
But
a community?
So I think, if I can tease that out, there's kind of two elements to that. One is this question about transparency, and the other is sort of return on investment. What do we actually, we want to know what we're spending and what it's being spent on. We want to know what the results of that spending are. And that these are both issues that the community needs
I don't want to interrupt you, but if we don't see the details, how would the community ever know that? Like, we pay taxes, that's our $2.6 million. How would we ever know if we had a return, if we have no idea? Like, I can come up with a financial statement like this. Everyone, if you run a business, has this.
So if I take away from that, is there a sense, maybe we should look for a bit of consensus around this, that part of the question of transparency really relates to that question of return on investment? We want to know what's being spent, and we want to know what we're getting as a result of it. Is that fair? And where it's being spent. Okay.
Where?
I've got hands all over the room, so I'm going to start over here and work back up to the front, sir.
Hi. Yeah, I just have a really quick question to follow up on that. How many business owners are on the committee? So 4. And how many government employees, people that work for KEDCO or work for the city, are on the committee?
That's 2. One with the city and
That count. And so we have people who are funding KEDCO, people who work at KEDCO, and that's 6 of the 10, and then we have a previous employee, that's 7 of 10. Would you say that's objective? Are there any contrarian opinions on there? People that might bring a dissenting view to help really challenge the review process?
Bo,
Yeah.
you want to respond to that?
It's difficult to stand in front of a room and sort of hear all this pressure coming, but I feel like I have to stand up and defend myself. I'm on the board. I don't work for KEDCO. I am you. I could go and sit in this room. I have no vested interest in KEDCO, aside from the fact that KEDCO is part of this community. That's why I applied to join for the board. I am a taxpayer. I probably got more invested in this than you do, because I probably spent 200 of my hours in this last year trying to get KEDCO work. So
It's a self-interest. It's a fox watching the henhouse. You're not objective.
But why? Why?
Because you did it for 200 hours. You're not going to say you did a bad job.
Okay, so let me tell you what happens at a KEDCO board meeting. No, please, just let me.
Let Bo have a chance to respond here.
At the board meetings, we've got counselors and we've got community members. And I can tell you the rigor that happens and the questions that are asked there are extensive.
Did you vet those board members before they were nominated?
We had
Did the KEDCO board vet the people who were nominated to be on the KEDCO board?
What we did was we interviewed a whole bunch of people.
So you
and
did.
we spent a lot of time with them, and we had excellent candidates.
That's bad governance in itself. You can't vet the people.
No,
You have to
stick
put it
with
out to the shareholders
stick
to
with
vote on
the
it.
KEDCO board, not the review committee. Okay.
I mean, the whole thing is a contradiction. You
So
can't
would you
nominate your
suggest-
own people to be on the board and then say that you all did a good job and then all be on the review committee to review your great job.
And we pay you for
And we pay you to do all of that. There's nobody on that committee in front of me, with all due respect, is somebody who's going to challenge what KEDCO has done, ever.
Well, think that's true.
Because none of us are on it.
I think
These are all people
that's-
with a vested
That's
interest.
casting, so I don't want to get it into sort of personal issues here as well. I think you've got some elected representatives who you have voted to be councillors who are there on that board. You've got people from the community at large who are neither on the KEDCO board, nor employees, nor working for the city. I think you've got a cross-section there. From one perspective, yes, I think some of those people are close to the organization, but I think there are a number of others that are there for entirely different reasons. Sorry, ma'am,
I was going to go back to the previous comments about transparency and kind of showing what KEDCO really does. I think there's a lot that KEDCO does do. For example, they offer advice to existing businesses, and that's something that's going to be really hard to measure. Like you just can't really measure it. But I think it's very simple. You should come up with something, even if KEDCO says, all right, we gave advice to this many businesses this year, then at least that's something to show the public about what they're doing with their time.
It's back to that notion of having some metrics to actually show some of the measures and results of some of the activity.
Exactly, and you mentioned nurturing the economic garden in your presentation. That's all part of it. These businesses, they might just need a little boost.
Right. Well, one of the notes that I have here is from Faith, who would ask a little bit about transparency. Do you want to sort of add in on this discussion? Sorry.
Take a look at,
Again, for the people online. Yeah.
oh gosh, okay. I've owned a home here for the last 17 years. I've lived in Kingston off and on since 1976, and I love Kingston. I've been a voice at City Council in the past for things that I've wanted changed, and so I'm here to try and have a little voice. When I saw the ledger of expenditures, my dander rose. And I have to say that I looked at it thinking for transparency, and I guess the travel question and travel and tourism were the two that I questioned because of duplication of services and also the fact that it wasn't showing where the money was really going or why. In teaching, we have pedagogies, we have accountability, we have a budget, a certain amount of money that comes in, and every penny of it, not that we have pennies anymore, but every cent of it is accountable. And I have to show to a parent or another teacher or my committee where that money's gone and how it was spent and why it was spent the way that it was. So I guess my concern is if you're going to take my hard-earned money and spend it, I don't mind that if it's to the benefit of the community one bit. But I don't see how spending so much money on travel shows me nothing if I don't know why you went or the benefits that you brought back to my community. The results, all measurable.
So in a sense, we're now sort of at a three-phase part of this process, that you want that better information up front, more transparent information at the front end. You want to have a sense of what the outcomes, the resources being used are, and you want that to be communicated to you in a way where you don't have to go hunting or you don't have to try to guess at what certain things mean. So there's a communications element there as well. I will come back. I've got a note here from Don Curtis, who also wanted to speak a little bit about this issue. Don, do you have anything to add?
I'd like to go back, first of all, to transparency, because I think it's a crock of crap. I've never seen a government at any level with so many in-camera meetings where when KEDCO meets with council, it's behind closed doors. We have no idea what goes on. When these two gentlemen tried to go to council and ask for the financial reports, the mayor turned the microphone off on them. That's not open government. When these ladies up front tried to talk to the council about the structure of this committee, they were threatened. They were threatened with a lawsuit. I don't call that open government. That's true. It just goes on and on and on. There is no open government in Kingston. I think that democracy is dead in Kingston not with you guys, you're all honorable, but with the government we got now. Everything is closed doors. Everything is shut down. It's gag orders. When Kingston First Group, and I'm not a member of it, went to council, there was not one question from one council member to them, and I found out the next day that they had been told not to ask questions. That's not open government. This just goes on and on and on. It's a disgrace. I am ashamed of what's going on in this city. The fact that the day of this meeting, KEDCO publishes their financial reports. The people have been asking for these financial reports for 6 months, been told, no, you can't have them. No, it's confidential information. And this day, they publish it when nobody has a chance to react to it. And they're garbage numbers. It doesn't tell me where my $30 million went. It doesn't tell me, who took like $40,000 trips to Spain. Tell me anything. What was the return? The job numbers. 5,000 jobs are supposed to be created in 2015. KEDCO now says that was a mistake. You bet your ass it was a mistake. It's probably like a third of that, if that. When I'm not finished. In previous years, they got 3,000 jobs for 5 years. How did they think they were going to get 5,000? I'm telling you, this is a bad government, not you guys. $10,000 a month on expenses. That's $120,000 a year. Good God, where did that go? What did that get me? The answer is it got me nothing. It got me $30 million out the window, and I'm really pissed. I'm a taxpayer. I have no axe to grind. I'm a taxpayer. I see closed government, closed minds, closed meetings. That's not right. That is not right. And I think they should be ashamed of themselves.
So, Don, thank you. I appreciate that very much. If I can draw a couple of ideas out of that. Sorry. I think one I don't want to put words in your mouth, so let me know if I'm on the right track here, is this notion of attribution. It's easy to say 5,000 jobs. How do we actually connect the numbers that are reported to the actual work? So we need to make sure that as performance measures are developed, that they're based in some sort of verifiable kind of metric or reality. The other aspect, though, which I think is really sort of a throwing down the gauntlet to the committee, in a sense, to sort of say there's some things that may be broken in the community, and this committee, regardless of what else is going on, may have the opportunity to kind of give something a fresh start, to take a different approach and a different look, and if they're going to do the job correctly, they need to be thinking in that direction. Yeah.
KEDCO has a clean slate now that the 3 staff have left. If there was misuse of funds in the past, it is a clean slate now going forward. You know what? You can't have a clean slate going forward. If there's even a hint of misuse or misappropriation of funds, and there is a hint of misappropriation, there's a lot of misappropriation of funds. You can't have a review committee unless you go back and find out who misused them and how they misused them and why they misused them. And I guarantee you there's a ton of them in that. And that's why, to this date, the city government has resisted putting these numbers out there because they know, I mean, it's criminal what's in there, but we're never going to see them. They're all hidden, they're sanitized. But I'm telling you right now, you don't have a clean slate to go forward. You don't.
I still have lots of hands here, so I promised this lady in the front row that we'd go there next, and then I'll come back to you, sir. And then I see you in the back row there, too.
Good evening to all the big crowd. It's great. I just have a couple of concerns. I've listened to Channel 13 when Donna Gillespie was on with another gentleman, and I listened to the questions that Julie Brown did, and I wrote down some things, and I read the newspapers, and I've been to different town hall meetings, and I, too, I'm a widow, right? And my taxes, I'll tell you, it's a stretch to pay. I don't want to leave my house. And then I look at $3 million, give or take, to an organization, basically, and that's what it is, because it's not part of the city, which I did not know. I always thought tourism was belonged to the city, but I guess it doesn't. And I guess my concern is, this is a lovely building here. It's nicely done, and I'm sure they need the space. But does the city not have space somewhere where KEDCO could go and do what they need to do? I mean, that would save $155,000 according to what's here. And the other thing that I hate seeing on any kind of a audit, whatever they want to call it, miscellaneous, I hate that word. Miscellaneous could be, let's all go for dinner at the Keg and spend $4,000. Who knows what miscellaneous is? I think when you do anything like this, it should be, accountable on where's miscellaneous gone? Is it for stamps? Could be. Is it for paper? Could be. But there has to be an attachment to what that miscellaneous is. In any business, I mean, I know, I worked in business, and my brothers had businesses, so I freaking well know exactly what happens in business. And they were millionaires, so I am not in business. I have never been in business,
but I know that I would like to know where my $2,800 a year that I pay municipal taxes go. And I know it has to be for other things, but you know what? I think KEDCO needs to be under the umbrella of the city of Kingston.
Thank you very much. Gentleman who's been waiting patiently back there for a while. Sorry about that. He's been waiting patiently since '67. This is nothing new.
That's the truth. So I just would like to sort of speak to the committee in the form of the committee. This committee's here in front of everybody in the town hall format, and I think that's a step in the direction that we want to see. I think the judgment of what this committee does will be done on the outcome of what we see going forward from them. So first and foremost, I just want to commend everybody that's taking part of it, everyone that's volunteered their time, efforts, and energy to be involved with this, because we want a better economic development future for the future of our city moving forward, and I think there's room for improvement. With due respect to that comment, I think we have to look, and I've looked into this on the basis of economic development. When I first heard the numbers of $2.7 million, I had no idea what $2.7 million was for economic development. I think when we see $2.7 million as a number, it's just a number, but what are the comparative bases for that? So I'm analytical. I looked at committees. I looked at other cities. I prepared a little report to sort of look at that because I wanted to discuss it with others. And I found that the $2.7 million in relative to the city was high. And I think part of what we need to do if we're going forward, I was in council when the Ames report was presented. And the Ames report, if no one's familiar with it, it's online. It is there and it's transparent for all to see. And the back of the report was very telling, because what it really got to was, well, backing up to the city side, but what you saw was a chart, and the statement was made that the City of Kingston's economic development budget is about median range to others. The use of data, and anybody that uses data or looks at data to use it can see that it can be used in any number of ways. What was interesting with that is the comparative basis for putting us in the middle compared us amongst Cornwall and to other smaller centers. And you actually, if you graph the data, which I did, and you break it out to cities in similar population and size, we are the most expensive on economic development. And I think if you're going to start with a clean slate, and if you're going to start with reviewing it forward, you need to readily identify that the budget that you have is excessive. When I looked at other markets and the people in the core business, I found these people were very accommodating. Guelph was cited by North Bay and cited by others as a shining example of what to do in terms of economic development. And when I asked Guelph for numbers, I spoke directly to their economic development CAO. He gave me everything that I asked for. I had it the next day. I had their budget, their breakdown, where it went, and then he accommodated that with an Excel table which showed what the budget plans were. So if they were doing something, and these are the comments that are made on a piecemeal basis, if you're spending $10,000, they broke these down, and they had an Excel table. These are the people involved. This is what we expect to get from this, and this is the breakdown of where it's going to go forward. And I just looked at that and said, that's just phenomenal in terms of understanding for all to see. And I didn't have to dig behind the scenes or do anything to see it. It was right there, and it was as clear as anybody that could read to look at and see what it was. I'm going to cite back to Waterloo, because Waterloo and the original comment, and just a bit of a segue, but Waterloo, I was at a seminar in Toronto last week. Waterloo has grown from, I think the number was about 180 new business startups in 2011 to over 460 new business startups. They've got an innovative marketplace. They've got money being invested in startup businesses, and those businesses are growing from internally within. We are a university city. We are a college city. We are a military city. We've got so much going for us, and we deserve more to understand it. And when I looked at the reports that came out with the 5,000 jobs, and I read the actual handout that was used for the 5,000, I was a little discouraged. Apart from the typos that were on the handout that was there, I read through it, and I couldn't understand what it said. I couldn't understand where the jobs were. I don't know what this agri-sector is. I go north of the city like you all go north of the city, and I don't see large farms, large business farms. I don't see huge agribusiness here to be with. And in the business side of it, from the land and the economic development side of it, There's lots of land that we have, there's lots of good site, but we need to be honest with ourselves and look at what we have. We have the most expensive land in the marketplace. And I know that's something that people look at in terms of where it is. So my primary point, and I'm getting a little off topic, my primary point was if we are going to be a clean slate and we are going to get this review forward, that we need to objectively say, you know what, we need to break down and look at where our numbers are and be realistic on what the core values of this. If this committee, to me, generates a one-page piece of documentation that says this is what KEDCO is going to do for the city and everyone can understand it, and there's a review process going forward, then I'm all for that. And again, I commend everybody that's on that table. I don't want to question the people that are doing what they're doing. I think that's very easy to do. I want to say that the outcome, you'll be judged on the end outcome of what you generate. Thank you.
Very much. That's very helpful. Ma'am in the back row there, and then sir in the bow tie will come to you next.
Thank you, sir. I've seen that report. I'm just an ordinary housewife who cares deeply about Kingston. I also know that Kingston came a long way since 1999, since we moved here, because it has improved a lot. However, having said that, I have a solution to accountability. I've mentioned to several councillors that what I'd like to see in each and every district, and mine doesn't have one, is a community association where we can have not just the residents come out and find out what's happening in their community, but businesses as well, to come in and hear from those councillors what they're going to have to discuss when they go into the next meeting at council. Rather than making decisions in council only, get out to the community, tell us what we're going to be about. I don't have one in my area. I'd love to have one, but I don't have one now. I did have one at one time. I know in this room we have excellent councillors. Lisa, I think, is fantastic. One-on-one councillors are great, but one-on-one does not help my next-door neighbor understand what's happening. As an investor, I'd like to know more about the businesses that are in my area. How can I help them? You're looking at networking with businesses. What I think a lot of businesses forget and don't have here, you have an employment agency's keys, fantastic. However, when do the unemployed or workers in transition get to meet one another and get to meet the business people here? No, you know, when I look for, if I want to employ somebody, I'll go to Keys and say, I will hire somebody, I want somebody. Well, maybe they just send me somebody that's not suitable to me. But if we have a community association or a networking place like what KEDCO could establish, where workers in transition can actually meet the business people and one-on-one and talk about their skills. To me, I'm a business of my own. I have a skill. I'm an Excel specialist. If I was looking for work, I'd be more interested in knowing which businesses need that skill. I'm a retired general accountant, and I work for companies like Nortel, and I work for companies like Ontario Hydro. And I know what happens in Waterloo. I love it. It's a fantastic area. Guelph, unbelievable, the accountability. And if you go on the internet and look for the CMA information in Guelph, you will have that spreadsheet that the gentleman here is talking about. It talks about where our policing is, how much money is, what kind of democratics, sorry, can't speak properly. You know, what kind of community are we living in? Where are our youth? What's happening with them? And you're right, Waterloo is fantastic in innovation. That should be more opened. What I'd like to see council do is make sure that every councillor has a community association, not just one meeting once for everybody, but maybe once a month. Come out to the community and tell the people and the business people in that area. The problem with the two-tier system with City Hall and KEDCO, an example that existed out the West End was when Lowe's were in process of trying to develop their business in our area. The crap that came out of the community, everybody yelling, yes, we want it, no, we don't. You know, all of that could have been saved if they just opened it up to a community association in the area. And I think that's what the city and KEDCO has to do. So thank you for listening.
Before I move on to the next question, I think maybe this is a good chance to kind of build on some of these ideas. We had the suggestion earlier that we need to think about what is the purpose of our economic development, and the suggestion that, new tax revenue generation was one of those things. We've had Guelph and Waterloo raised as kind of models of interesting practices, somehow that we could be more like some of the things that they do. As we continue the discussion, maybe we can start to think a little bit about what do we want our economic development to achieve? What is the purpose or the goal of our economic development work? And why is this something that we feel is important? You're all here. You're obviously vested in this interest, that somehow there's something important about economic development of the community. What is it that we're hoping to accomplish? What's the purpose of economic development as we see it? So I don't want to necessarily steer you away, sir, from the comments you wanted to make, but if you can perhaps reflect on those sorts of issues as well as you're sharing your input.
No, actually, I just wanted to say on a side note, something I learned long ago, that any committee that has more than 3 in it is pretty well doomed to begin with, more than 3. So here we have a fairly small organization run by 12 directors, correct me if I'm wrong. I think IBM might only have 11. So the first thing they do is set up a committee of 10 to study it, and the first thing they do, of course, is hire a consultant. That's the trifecta.
Sir, just behind you there, sir. Yeah.
I didn't come here tonight as an angry citizen. I came here as a concerned citizen. And I'm not going to embellish on our family business success, but I'm proud to tell you that my wife and I started this company 45 years ago. We're across 3 countries, employ in excess of 2,000 employees in a very diverse industry. We probably have 12 of the biggest clients in the world. And the reason we're successful is we're held accountable every day of the week, 7 days a week, to design a process to determine an outcome. And we're measured every day of the week. And those outcomes are scored against the industry standards, the future expectations, and how they sustain themselves in a very global, competitive community. Now, in all due respect to you, how many cities in these 3 countries do you think I came and watched this same presentation? A lot of them. Now, everything needs to be scored. Now, unfortunately, you have a lot of wonderful taxpayers in this community that has asked for results for a year. In a year, I've watched this dance go on. I didn't come here to dance tonight. I came here to listen and hopefully go away with some confidence that we're actually going to do something about our community, that we have a wonderful group of public assets here. But the disheartening thing is, I don't know if you've done your homework to realize that the biggest private employer in this city is coffee shops. Did you know that? So to buy your groceries on Friday, you need to have 3 jobs in coffee shops to buy your groceries. Now, when I started the business, this building here employed 2,600 people. And I was one of the vendors that came in here bumper to bumper to do business. This company here had a multiple factor of 7. So do the math. It affected probably 15,000 people in the community that had good paying jobs, career jobs. I've watched this decline. I love this city. I've traveled across the world pretty much and come back and live here. I haven't got one of my family members that live in Kingston. But I still a pretty significant investor in this community. And I respect each and every one of these citizens that came here tonight and care about remedying our distraught private sector. I wouldn't want to see us give up one of these public sector jobs or one of these public institutions. But what are we doing here? We've been in a decline for so long that we're in denial. Somebody needs to save us. Thank you.
Thank you. If I can get just a little additional clarification there, as you think about what that looks like practically, I mean, is the focus then that the economic development structure, whatever emerges out of this process, needs to be working more closely with local businesses like yours? Is it a focus on kind of job creation or quality job creation to bring back those multiplier effects you talked about? What would you like to see them? Yeah, sorry, if we can.
It's about focus after you designed your journey. It's about discipline. And it's about being proud on reporting yourself whether you failed or passed. It's called a scorecard. Did you have another question?
Oh, I think that's great. There was a hand behind you, I think. Oh no, over here in the green shirt. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So I want to thank Brock for coming into a situation that is not of his own making, and he's getting a feel for the scope of the problems that we've got here. I want to make one practical point that hasn't been made yet. I think the tourism section of KEDCO could perhaps be separated out, at least when it comes to the accountability part. I think most people understand what tourism is about, and there might be more direct measurable attributes or elements to it that could assist in the accountability element, which has been raised by a lot of people in the crowd tonight. And I've talked to people in the industry as well who have said this, so I'm passing on concerns I've heard. I'm not in the business myself. I think people from Kingston First have done tremendous service so far. I mean, they have the credibility from their success, and that helps a lot. They've been persistent in attempting to improve the situation, and we do have a long way to go. I did do work in Calgary, which is a very entrepreneurial center. Kingston is more of an institutional center, and there's been work done at the School of Business here looking at how difficult it is in an institutional community to get more of an entrepreneurial mindset. I think KEDCO could benefit from studying that. So that's one practical thing. So I think we've underachieved. And not speaking from the political standpoint, but I am the chair of Kingston and the Islands NDP for civic issues. And traditionally the NDP and its forerunner of the CCF looked out for people who were struggling in life, working hard and not getting anywhere, underemployed, unemployed, disabled, and so forth. I think people in that sector in Kingston are really hurting. And they're the first to suffer when, say, basic economic generators aren't working. Our real estate costs are high. They're comparable to Ottawa. So we're seeing that in the decline of the quality of life for people at the bottom of the scale. It's noticeable. So I think that that's one element that KEDCO has to focus on. I want to continue on one point which one other gentleman raised. As of January 1st, 2016, the Office of the Ombudsman of Ontario has the power to oversee civic government in Ontario, which it didn't have before. Also post-secondary and school boards. So that may assist if someone were to take the initiative and try to get at the details of what KEDCO has been doing for the last 20 years and where that money's gone and how it's been used and, as one gentleman pointed out, possibly misused. I'd like to know what happened. Thank you.
Sorry, question here, and then we'll move back over to the wall.
So my name is Hugh McKenzie. I'm a tourist operator in town, operate the boat lines and trolley tours. I've been working in tourism since 1980 in the Ottawa Valley and came to Kingston in 1991. I've said this many times in many forums like this, that the Kingston tourism model is the best that exists anywhere that I've seen in the province. And the reason why it is the best model, and it's not necessarily as it relates to the overall issue of KEDCO, but it does relate to how the funding, the travel, the expenses, and the results tie in. Tourism represents about half the budget, plus or minus, and there are issues with how the budget is portrayed and where the money goes and how we get to see the visibility of all of that. But the reason why it's the best model is because there is a requirement in tourism to have people in the field looking after so many of the aspects, such as government relations, media inquiries, travel trade, meetings and conventions, all of these activities that no one business can be everywhere at all places. We count on the representation of a staff-intensive organization to do these functions. So for instance, so much of the business generation that happens, the people that come and visit Kingston, come from Europe, come from Asia, come from China, come from the US. You can't do that sitting at your desk in Kingston. You have to be at ABA. You have to be at Munich. You have to be at the London Travel Show. You have to do Bienvenue Quebec. You have to do all of these areas where you need staff out representing our destination. We have, when the people arrive in Kingston, we have an immense role for visitor information services. And again, that's a staff-intensive service. It's something that is measured in a number of ways, how many souvenirs they sell out of VIC, but that's really a false measurement because we really don't want them selling souvenirs. We want them giving information, quality information. So it is, if you look at how Kingston has developed in tourism over the 25 years that I have been here, it is a terrific model. It's a terrific model because there's been consistent funding, consistent staffing, and a consistent model that has followed on destination attraction. And if you look at where that's had an impact, look at how many hotels have been built over the last 10 years and what that does to revenue generation. Look at the RevPAR growth in hotels in Kingston since 2000 through to now, and it probably leads the province. So I just want it to be clear that not everything is as it seems with how KEDCO functions. The tourism side is again, it's the best model that I have seen, and I have seen them across the province. Thank you.
I think it's a very eloquent way of sort of bringing some of those ideas forward. And I guess is part of this sometimes that, the businesses that are really kind of benefiting from some of these programs that are sort of inside it aren't always sharing that experience with the community, or a lot of the information gets secondhand rather than firsthand in this kind of a context where we can hear about how that works. Thought about that?
I would agree with that, and agree with you that
it is a very hard thing to measure exactly what KEDCO does. And part of it is exactly what you just mentioned, that it isn't shared with the community, perhaps. Our company has received an awful lot of benefits from KEDCO over the years. Jeff Guerra was very supportive of our company, and he did it in many very small ways that were very, very successful for our business. So one of the things he would always do, he would arrange tours with the mayor, and a handshake with the mayor from a foreign person, where a mayor is a very big thing in Middle East, for instance, huge position. And the mayor himself regularly would take them on tours of City Hall and sit in his office and talk to them, all organized by Jeff Guerra and KEDCO. These are things that, the BR&T, we received a lot of BR&T from KEDCO over the years. I totally agree with what everyone's saying in terms of financial statement accountability. Absolutely. Mr. Robinson was bang on. We're all measured and we're scored by scorecards. And obviously we don't have that. It needs to be there. But one of the things that I mentioned to Donna just the other day before the meeting was that perhaps the ability for other small business in town to understand the use of KEDCO and how useful they can be to them is not communicated to those small businesses. So maybe they're unaware that they can use KEDCO for these services. And the concept of, weekly visits and that sort of thing, they'd be out there all the time. There's a lot of businesses here. But certainly we've received a lot of benefit from KEDCO, and I wouldn't say it was in dollars. It wasn't in dollars, but it was in great success and really helped our business a lot.
Excellent. Thank you very much. A comment here? No? Back up to the front. And I know there are a couple of hands in the middle. I'll make my way down there next.
I feel a bit naive in this, but is there not a Kingston Tourism under the tourism branch?
I know we have some tourism staff in the room that can. Do you want to share?
There is. Okay.
I don't want to take too much time in terms of.
So is there a duplication then of money going to Kingston Tourism, then money going to KEDCO, and KEDCO redirects it back to Kingston Tourism, and then there's also a provincial tourism encouragement, right? There's one that comes in and tries to rebrand Kingston. One night I was down there at council meeting, right? And it's funded by the government. Isn't that a lot of duplicity?
I'd be happy to.
Couldn't our money be better spent putting it in one? It just seems like this trail is very convoluted.
I'd be happy to step in there.
So that notion of duplication is one that I want to come back to in a few minutes as well, but just very briefly on the tourism side, can you fill us in a little of the practical side of the structure?
Absolutely. My name is Violet. I'm the Director of Tourism here in Kingston. It is a complicated landscape, and you certainly bring up a lot of valid questions. Tourism Kingston is a destination marketing organization that's an agency of the city. So we request money through the municipality in the same way that KEDCO does. Those funds are siphoned through KEDCO. However, they're not, there's not a filter that KEDCO says, okay, we're gonna keep this amount of money and the rest goes to tourism. It's a very cut and dry process in terms of the budget. You're certainly right, there is another group within Kingston that also helps support tourism marketing, and that's the Kingston Accommodation Partners, a very entrepreneurial-led group of hoteliers who provide a tourism levy to help support the money that Tourism Kingston provides in order to market the destination. On top of that, there's also the OTMPC, so the Ontario Tourism Marketing Partnership Cooperation. That is an Ontario-led cooperation that essentially partners with local tourism entities like ourselves, like the Kingston Accommodation Partners, and says, okay, where your tourism dollars can only go so far, we're going to help you leverage certain campaigns. For example, this year we're launching an exciting campaign that's going to take our marketing to a region of Quebec that we've never targeted before. It's also going to see us going into the States to help bring in those US dollars to come into Canada for tourism. So there really are three entities, but Tourism Kingston itself is the destination marketing organization that is an agency of the city.
So in a sense, KEDCO is kind of like an umbrella, and that operation sort of falls underneath that umbrella. It's
exactly.
One of the various functions that it administers.
That's right.
The person that works in tourism for KEDCO, couldn't they be with the Tourism Kingston and the money go directly to them and not be filtered through?
So Tourism Kingston is under the KEDCO umbrella. It's the same structure, really.
So that's me.
But it is duplication.
One and the same.
It's the same, it's the same structure with two different names in a sense.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Clarify that, please. I'm not sure that it's the same structure. It gets the money through KEDCO, but they don't report to KEDCO.
Yes, they do.
That's important, the distinction.
So they do, they're told that they do report to KEDCO, so, yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I think that point is just that it's not necessarily clear. It's hard to tell. I was talking to some people before the meeting about the Small Business Enterprise Center as well, which is provincially funded to work with local entrepreneurs, especially startups. So there's a whole range of these structures that fall under that KEDCO umbrella. And from a public perspective, it's not always easy to understand who the various players are.
Hi, I'm Donna Gillespie. Just to clarify the tourism question, Tourism Kingston is a division of the Kingston Economic Development Corporation. So our Director of Tourism, Violet Hebert, who answered the question, she's an employee of KEDCO. Of our approximately $3 million budget, $1.4 million of KEDCO's total budget is directed specifically to tourism marketing and development under the name Tourism Kingston.
Yes, some cities have their tourism operation as a department of the city, yes. Yeah.
That's where I don't go to the economic development, I go to the.
You usually go to a visitor information center or something, which is part of what they administer, yeah. Sorry, there was a hand here, I think.
First, let me preface my comment by saying I'm 100% certain that all 10 people on this board have the City of Kingston's best interests in mind.
Yes.
But I came here to get an answer to a question. I've asked the question, and I do not have a satisfactory answer. So I'm going to simplify it. How can this committee be objective?
Are there committee members? I mean, I think a couple of, Bo, you talked that, are there a couple of committee members that would like to speak to that specifically? Do you feel you can be objective about these issues? Judith?
You're doing the exact same thing. You're asking them if they can be accountable about their accountability. How's that an answer to my question?
Are you suggesting perhaps that you see us as having conflicts of interest?
Let-
Could you be specific?
Yes, let me ask you a follow-up question. You talk about outcomes,
Yes.
okay? Also a beautiful MBA word. What outcomes are on the table? And is the possibility of shutting down KEDCO one option on the table?
Nothing is off the table.
That's not an answer to my question.
That's the answer you're getting tonight.
If you're accountable to us, they're your employer.
So, as the external,
The process has got to continue. We're right at the beginning of
Can
the
you,
process.
you have a comment?
as the external advisor to the group, I would say there are some communities who have elected not to have economic development operations.
Who's
They've made a conscious
who's cutting the
decision.
check to you?
It's a good question. It's going to be shared, as I understand it, between KEDCO and the city.
Well, can I ask a question? Why does it shared? We're kind of working, we are kind of working for both, but it's, like, I don't, maybe I'm very dumb in this, or naive, but if you're looking after KEDCO on a review, and they're not under the city, because the city gives them money, why is the city paying some of your salary, or your, whatever you get, and KEDCO paying some, if they're a corporation on their own?
Yeah, I think that's right. It's all taxpayer dollars at the root.
Absolutely, but I understand that, I'm not that dumb. I know that, because my taxpayer monies go to KEDCO, which I'm sure that they're fine to do whatever they do. But my question is, if they are their own corporation, away from the city, because they're not basically accountable to the city, from what I understand, I may be right out of bed in most things, that, well, I've done some trying to find out. If in fact,
because my understanding is correct, KEDCO says they're not under the umbrella of the city, although the city gives them money, which I give them money, then why are you getting paid by the city? It's like Alcan paying for half of DuPont's consultants, which doesn't make sense. I'm just,
Yes, so these things are always a little convoluted. I guess what I would say is, I mean, some of this comes back to the structure of the Corporations Act and things like this in Ontario. KEDCO exists as an organization at arm's length. It has a board of directors, some members of whom are coming from the city, some members of whom are drawn from the business community. It seeks funding from a range of sources. It gets contributions from private companies, it gets contributions from other levels of government, it sells various products to raise those, and it gets tax revenues from the city as well. Of the 3.1 million or so in the current fiscal year, I think about 2.4 million comes from the city. So it has to go to the city on an ongoing basis to request those funds. And council makes a decision or reviews the application for funding on an ongoing basis. So there's no guaranteed funding to KEDCO. There's no blank check that's written. They have to make the request on an ongoing basis. And as I understand it, that's part of what's prompted some of this review is that the last couple of years, some of those requests have prompted some discussion, to put it mildly, some questions. And that has led the mayor in particular to say it's time we had a review to understand whether this is a worthwhile way for us to direct those funds. And as a result, this process is being paid in part by KEDCO. They want to understand whether they should be continuing as an organization. It's funded in part by the city, who as the principal funder has to make some long-term decisions about whether or not it will continue its support or if it will alter that support in some way to look for different kinds of operations or a different level of support. And so the notion behind the review committee is it's a collaboration between some of these groups to say, what makes the most sense for this community? What is it that's going to generate the best possible results and how do we get there? And the review committee itself is the one who will ultimately make a recommendation to the various funders, to the various partners to say this is what we think is the most appropriate way forward.
Just coming back to the comments about the budget for, not for economic development, but for tourism, I think this is just a position to the board here and the group formed to do this is there's confusion and understanding of where the dollars go. I think there's no one in the city of Kingston that would say investment in tourism is not a great investment. We certainly want to have the best we can for our tourism sector, and I don't think there's anyone that would question that. What would be nice to see is a great understanding of where things go and where things break down. I know from the Ames report, the tourism budget for the city of Kingston was $1.268 million. That's from the KEDCO portion of it. Peterborough is a fairly touristy market. It's $644,800. St. Catharines was $303,000. I did speak to Niagara Falls on their tourism, and I don't understand all the inner workings of that. I think it's there's a lot of things going on where you could stand back and make judgments on it that would be hard to sort of do it. But I know Niagara Falls spends, I think they give $350,000 to their association that is like a cap. But I don't know the full works of that. I didn't dig deep in that. I was looking at the economic development. My principal point is 1.26, is that well spent money? Is that enough? Do we need to spend more, or what are our returns on that money? Certainly the one gentleman speaks very highly of it, but from the citizens of the city, I don't think we know a hell of a lot of what happens with those dollars or where they go, apart from the fact it's a big number to us. And I know from looking at this and standing back, and I'm very naive to look at the tourism sector, but I looked at the Niagara region, and there was a budget where the Ministry of Tourism funds the Niagara region. And this is a big area for tourism. This is the wine sector. This is huge marketplace. Their budget was $3.2 million for a very large sector, largely financed by a Ministry of Tourism. Their budget for advertising from that $3.2 million was 56%. 56% of the $3.2 million went to advertising and promoting the Niagara tourist region to attract those people from foreign markets to that. When I stood back and looked at the KEDCO budget, and I looked at it from just the basis that from what I could see, I saw an advertising budget of $300,000 was roughly the advertising budget. I was told that 50%, when I first saw it in the paper, 50% of that budget was for tourism. So I equated, we're roughly running 10% of the $1.3 million, or less than 10%, going to advertising, promoting the marketplace. It's questions like that that have us questioning what is the breakdowns, what is the real returns. People in the know probably, there's a strong advocate here, and I don't think anyone in the city of Kingston would say that we want to do less for our tourism sector, but we need to know that the returns for it are there. So the comment to this committee and this group formed is let's find a way of getting accountable reporting. Let's get a report card that we can actually measure and understand and know what the real returns are, because certainly it's not just KEDCO in the advertising. There's the CAP organization that's mentioned. There's Ministry of Tourism. There's regional advertising for that. There's websites that Belleville takes part of and Kingston benefits through Ministry of Tourism funds. It's a very broad spectrum. It's very confusing and it's easy to criticize, but I think it's fair to say from our tax dollars, we want to understand what our returns are on that. That's my comment on tourism.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm Murray Matheson. I'm with Kingston Accommodation Partners. So just to clarify, I know there's some confusion about all the tourism players in the city and how they're all funded and what they all do. But Kingston Accommodation Partners is made up of 20 hotel B&B properties in Kingston, and we're 100% self-funded. So we receive no municipal funding, no provincial funding. We started up in 2004 because we saw the challenges that Tourism Kingston was facing, who is Tourism Kingston, a division of KEDCO, so municipal funding. Their funding was inadequate to support a significant marketing campaign into the very expensive markets of Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal. So over the past 11 years, Kingston Accommodation Partners has worked closely with Tourism Kingston to kind of divide and conquer when it comes to workload and expenditures. So our biggest spend, over half our budget, goes to marketing, and we make up that shortfall in marketing dollars that Tourism Kingston has. And as Hugh was mentioning earlier, Tourism Kingston focuses on those labor-intensive areas. The Visitor Information Center is significantly important to us in Kingston and for tourism. And they also have meetings and convention sales and sport tourism sales. And so that's kind of the lay of the land in tourism. Be more than happy at any time to meet and go through the actual numbers with you. We have pretty open books when it comes to that. And Brock, I just want to thank you for curing me of any ambition to run for municipal office tonight. So.
We had asked the question a little bit earlier about what should the goal of some of our economic development activity be? And one of the questions that's come up is this notion of duplication or the possibility of duplication. We had a suggestion, unfortunately the gentleman just left, around, our priority should be generating new taxes. But we also had the suggestion that we need to be thinking about quality jobs. Coffee shops are not the answer or the be-all and end-all of where our economy needs to go. We had it very eloquently raised that we need to be thinking about those who are sort of marginalized in the current economy. I have a question here that asks about how KEDCO could be assisting and leveraging the skills of refugees coming to the community. Ultimately, we can see a pretty big tent emerging here as we think about the things that KEDCO could be involved in. Do you have a sense from your perspective as we start to kind of think about what we can be accountable around, where we need to be transparent, the kinds of things we need to accomplish at the community level? What are the priorities? What are the things that you think KEDCO should be focused on? What are the top things they should be doing? Maybe they feel there's something that's kind of peripheral to where they're going, and you really want them to kind of focus in on something that you feel is especially important. So second row from the back there.
I understand a bit about transparency and accountability, but it seems to me that there's a bit of a more fundamental problem that's been brought up, and that's around trust. So if you can't trust the people that are going to do the review, then you can't trust the result that comes out of it. And I would like to suggest that perhaps we should start building the trust between the community and KEDCO the way we've seen it, so we can have a better foot going forward. Thanks.
Sorry, I don't want you to pass it on. Just if you've got a couple of thoughts or suggestions about how the committee could point to.
Yeah, no,
point
probably.
To help build that.
Yeah, open up your books. Let us see them.
Right.
Do the right thing. If you don't want the suspicion, then let's see what's going on, because we deserve to see it. We should see it, and if you don't want us to be suspicious around it, open them up.
Absolutely, thank you. Next to you, and then on the back row, and then at the back wall.
If I may,
Please.
first of all, I want to congratulate tourism. I have brought out of town, out of country guests here for a lot of years. And I'm very proud to bring them to our city. And tourism does a great job. That is not my concern. I don't know who's crippling who here, but we're walking with a limp. And it's not tourism's causing it. So, let me be very clear. To be successful on anything you go to do, you have to know what you're looking for, and you've got to bring a single focus to that. So, tourism, with all its greatness, is clouding the issue of the chronic problem. We have too many coffee shops and not enough jobs for career people that come out of Queens and St. Lawrence College for us to keep them here. So separate tourism to put it somewhere and don't hurt it, because it's one of the best in the world right here in Kingston. But we're clouding the issue, Brock. We've got to bring discipline to retaining our graduates from Queens, RMC, St. Lawrence College, and have them right here in this city, and have them have an affordable income and disposable income. That's where our trouble lies. So let's not confuse the issue. Thank you, tourism.
Thank you very much. In the back row.
Actually, Brock, that was one of the questions I had put forward, is I know for a fact that Kingston is going to have 600 families brought in
refugees,
to refugees. And I think back to, what is it, employment in our area, and people who don't have jobs here, and they're going to be upset. What are we going to do? We're adding another 600 people. Where are they going to take our jobs, and so on and so forth. And then there's the divide between, yes, we want them, and no, we don't. But I'll offer another solution. When I think of the people that are coming from those countries, before the war, before the disaster, those men and women that were in those countries, they had jobs, they had businesses. I know for a fact they had a business because St. Paul's is actually sponsoring a refugee family of 6. So the gentleman owned his own business, and of course now he's here in Canada with his wife and 4 children. So we say, okay, what are we going to do as a society to help these 600 people? Do we put them on a welfare system once we're finished with sponsoring them and doing so on and so forth? Or do we encourage them by networking with one another within those 600 families on how to help themselves, and maybe start looking at the fact that their skills are still there, their business knowledge is still there, and helping them develop through KEDCO, through networking, through deciding on what they can bring to our community and start new businesses here. Because let's face it, anybody that's been an immigrant has always faced the dreaded word, Canadian experience. And I'm saying we really have to think about what we're doing here in Kingston with that 600 families. I don't have the solution, but I do know one thing. We got to start thinking about, do they become a drain on our society, or do they become an asset? They become an asset because they have the skills to do it. Remember I says, I'm a business of my own because I have the skills when it comes to accounting. What about them? And that's why I brought it and said, okay, what can KEDCO do? And can we have a networking of business people and workers in transition? That's why I mentioned that.
Thank you very much. And a question at the back.
Thank you. I think my name is Ruth Nordegraff, and actually I want to kind of also respond to the comment that was made. I'm actually the coordinator of the Kingston Immigration Partnership, so I'm very much involved in the refugees and immigration in general. And I actually, a lot of you may not know that KEDCO is actually really instrumental in that role. And I think I want to echo that. Actually, I think it's Mr. Robinson made some points about having a vision and stick to that vision. I think that's really important. And so that's one thing I wanted to mention. The refugee piece, 600 families is not a very accurate number. Hopefully it will not be 600, because I think there's definitely a question around how much capacity do we have in our community. But regardless of the number, I think it's really important to know that there are community partners, including KEDCO, that are part of these conversations. And it kind of goes back to a lot of the comments around understanding what the role is of KEDCO and maybe some of the stories that are not always told that KEDCO is doing. And I think that's really important, just trying to understand what is KEDCO doing, but obviously also looking at what they should be doing. But as for immigration, I just wanted to, and it's kind of interesting that you just raised that point, because I really want to commend KEDCO on taking a lead on that. In addition, I wanted to mention that I wanted to also, I think it's also really important to talk about the workforce development piece that KEDCO is doing and maybe should be doing more. I'm not sure, I'm not an economic development expert. But again, kind of, KEDCO is playing a role in seeing where the jobs are, making those connections and measuring where the jobs are. So I think that's a piece that I would really, find valuable for our community. Thank you.
Brock, you said a couple times about what we see as the future of KEDCO or what we want from KEDCO, and my comment might be that there was a question about objectivity and can people that are up front really look at it objectively. And I might just suggest that that question in itself is predicting an outcome, that there is a KEDCO. And really the question I think that people here have is, what do we want in terms of economic development in Kingston? And that may mean they're not KEDCO. And so by talking about what do we want from KEDCO, we're suggesting that's the solution. And, the question was, is that on the table of not having KEDCO? Maybe Tourism Kingston's its own entity. Maybe there's a different economic development model. Maybe it's brought in-house. But by talking about it constantly, what do we see in KEDCO, you're sort of already predicting the outcome. And I think that's part of the problem, is that people don't see value in KEDCO. And by talking about that being the solution, it is an objective from the beginning. And, it does raise a question of, can the committee be objective, truly objective?
I appreciate that. So that's a challenge with my vocabulary. I've been using it as a bit of a shorthand to kind of raise the question of what do we think we should do with the structures, what we have, what we need, whether what we have is gone or here or whatever. So I apologize for that. But I think the challenge that you're raising is clear to the committee as they go off to do their work. They know there's a segment of the community that's looking to hold their feet to the fire over whether or not they can make that kind of an honest assessment. And whatever result or report comes out of this process, it has to be geared towards convincing people like yourself that they've been as objective as they can be, and that ultimately that the expectation is that they're going to make decisions in the best interest of the community and not in the best interest of any existing structure.
Perception is key. Whether or not that's reality, beside the point, the perception that they are. And if they have to show us that they are, it's already lost.
Question here?
So I run a business. 100% of my business's income comes from outside of Kingston. And in my experience, I could care less if KEDCO exists. It doesn't impact my business. And the opportunities that KEDCO has had to interact with my business has resulted in drop balls. And so I had a conversation with the previous CEO to say, hey, your employees have come into my office. They've made some promises. They don't deliver. They don't work for me. So how do I hold them accountable if they're not delivering their promises? How do you hold them accountable as the CEO? Say, hey, you've made a promise to a business. How did you follow through? And the unfortunately, I'm glad he's gone, but the response was that he didn't know. He had no ability to tell what kind of conversations were happening between employees of KEDCO and businesses. I'm not in the tourism business. And so I said, well, what tools do you have to do that? In my business, I have tracking tools. We develop software, so there's lots of software tools available that my employees have to justify their day. So they work 8 hours a day. They have to justify what they did during that day. I can look back a year later, look at these tracking tools and say, hey, I can report in my research and development tax credits off of this tool because I knew what they did a year ago because they reported it in this tool. So I know that KEDCO did invest in Salesforce, but I also know that it's not being used, or as of the last conversation with the previous CEO, it wasn't being used appropriately. So I would strongly suggest that a result of this review committee, whether KEDCO exists or not, if KEDCO is going to exist, these tracking tools, whichever one you choose, there's lots available, should be put in place so that KEDCO can say, hey, look, this is what our team did. Doesn't mean you could obscure and you could take the reporting and summarize it so you can hide confidential information. But at least then, if there's tracking tools being used, and especially, why are we buying licenses for Salesforce if we're not using them? It's bizarre. But then if these tracking tools are being used, then KEDCO could justify its existence pretty easily. So I would request that the review committee consider something like this.
Thank you. Question here, and then I'll come back up front.
The golden nugget when you're in business is measurement. Bernie's alluded to it a couple of times. We will do anything to get measured. In government, it's just the opposite. They'll do anything to get out of being measured. And I can remember when I was on the board, we tried to peg KEDCO down to two things. You mentioned both of them at the outset. Find good existing companies and work with them to grow, to create jobs, however you want to measure it, jobs or tax, as Chandler said, and go out and see what other companies would move here. That's it. Just do those two things. And we could not get them to do that. They'd come to the next meeting, there'd been a layoff someplace, and they'd set up a training committee. Now, we've already got 15 other people in the city that could do that kind of training. Then they went on the doctor route. We need new doctors. Okay, somebody has to do that, but that was not KEDCO's mandate. And I definitely disagree with the refugees. They might need help. But all that is another excuse to get off the beaten track. So this is simple. Bernie's two words, focus and clarity. Get on it and stay on it. And that's it.
So since do the things that nobody else can do, or find those partners to lead the other things in the areas that aren't part of that core mission. So I think that's a strong message. Sorry, I lost track of where the microphones are.
That's trouble.
I'm going to come for a couple up here, and then I'll...
Hello. I'd just like to add to comments that have been made earlier in regard to the mandate of this committee. I have a two-page sheet here, which is the terms of reference. The first item is the role of the committee, and the second is the responsibilities, and the balance is the governance. There is nowhere in the role and the responsibility which says this committee's review process is open-ended. It is pretty tight. It is that the council has issued instructions to this committee to look within the structure of KEDCO and find ways to improve it. Therefore, I think I can comfortably confirm that the mandate of this committee does not include scrapping of KEDCO. If it was to be included, that should be in role and responsibility. And if this committee thinks that's a part of the mandate, perhaps the committee need to go back to the council and say, we have to add this to our responsibilities. Thank you.
Thank you for raising it. I think that's helpful. Dave? That's me.
Jeez, sorry about that. I broke the mic. Is that test? Oh, it's broken? Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Dave Morgan, and just maybe a tough question coming from somebody that spent their career in municipal government, but I'm just curious about whether this is an organizational review, number one. Number two is what's the dynamics between the committee and the actual board? Do they still both exist, and how they're sort of dealing with each other? Thirdly, I've noticed that more recently KEDCO's been advertising for a number of positions. So the idea of scrapping KEDCO really isn't on the agenda. And just whether or not, are these going to be full-time contracts? Will they be short-term contracts until this organization review is completed? Thanks.
Is it something?
Hi, thanks, Dave. To answer your question, there are 3 positions that have been advertised for. 2 of those positions are with the Small Business Development Center, which is another division within KEDCO. It's funded in part by the province of Ontario to deliver specific programs. So the 2 positions related to the Small Business Development Center are program-specific and are time-specific contracts. One to support Summer Company, a youth program, so it will run from February until approximately September when the program wraps up. And the second one would be for Starter Company, and it would run until the end of the provincial funding, which is in 2017. So they're specific to those. The third position is a business development officer, and as it would be a full-time permanent contract. As per all of our contracts, we're all subject to receiving adequate funding to cover. So that's something all staff understand from the time we start at KEDCO.
So I have one question. What about Keys of Kingston? If you're doing the service that they're doing, are you not kind of hurting their availability to do their job more effectively?
I'm sorry,
Keys of Kingston does the role that you're hiring someone to do in one of their jobs.
No, there's no duplication between our business development officer, which would assist with business retention and expansion of local companies, as well as attraction of new companies. It's not related to Keys and employment or workforce development.
But the first job, which is a temporary one, I thought for the youth, I thought that's what Keys does in Kingston.
No, this would be a separate program called Summer Company, and it's designed to assist students who are returning to school to start a summer business. So it's very specific. Only the Small Business Development Center is funded by the province to deliver this particular program. Keys may be funded for other types of programs, but very different streams.
So someone like myself who's in the carpentry program full-time right now, we would come to you if we wanted to do our own business, and you would be facilitating that startup is what you're talking about.
Correct. So we deliver the program and administer it on behalf of the province of Ontario. It's starting right now, so you would go to ontario.ca/summer company, so you would actually apply through the province, and then you would work with KEDCO if you were accepted into the program.
I'm conscious of the time as well, and I'm not going to cut the discussion off. We are at 9 o'clock, and that was sort of the intended wrap-up phase of this. We're happy to continue going as the questions and comments continue to occur, but at some point we may want to sort of break to chat more informally as well. But I won't cut anything off. We'll keep going for a few more minutes, but I just wanted to acknowledge that we have kind of hit that milestone that we initially talked about. I've got a number of hands here at the back.
Hi, my name's Hank Dornekamp. I'm an immigrant, but the point I want to make is, on what Dave Morgan has just brought up, the first directive that should come from the committee is a freeze on all hiring and spending. You've got to wait till you get direction from this new committee. And that's the problem. We're starting to go all over again as to what we've done in the past. And as I see, there's, 6 influence members on that board now. Like, we got to get rid of that influence. We got to start anew, and we got to talk about perhaps disbanding KEDCO, setting up a whole new organization. And secondly, maybe it should become an arm of the city, because now all of a sudden we're going to become accountable in our spending. No longer when we go to a convention that we need to go to, does the partner come, and on a 2-day convention we're there for 2 weeks. We've heard all the horror stories. I'm tired of hearing that. That's the problem I have. Transparency and accountability, please.
Thank you. Along the back wall.
Thank you. There's been a couple of questions about trust, and I just wanted to ask the review committee. And I know money's not everything, but is the board of KEDCO besides is the board of KEDCO paid for their position, and is the review committee paid outside of the council members that sit on the committee?
No, in both cases. Yeah.
Okay, I didn't think so. Thank you.
Thank you. Dave, a question up here. Sorry.
I was just hoping to get some clarity on the dynamics between the committee, the review committee, and the board of directors. And, you know, is there an influence from the board side, or does the committee report to council? How does that whole system work? The other comment that I wanted to make, I was a little bit nervous standing up there, Brock. I don't know how you do it. They
haven't thrown anything at you yet.
No, it's coming. I'm a graduate of the Economic Development Program through the University of Waterloo, and I know Brock is a member of the board of directors for that program, and he's also a really good choice by City Council to bring to this community. I, for one, am very happy to have you here, Brock. I think you'll do a great job. The other comment I wanted to make is related to my year 2 research paper, and I was doing a research paper on the benefits of a regional approach to industrial land development. Not necessarily all of the business of KEDCO, but I'm hoping that this committee will take that into consideration. I think there's some great opportunities for KEDCO. You know, the city of Kingston is, you know, the most important city in this region, and I think there's some opportunities out there. We have, you know, well over 1,000 acres of industrial land that are not being developed, and I think there's some opportunities for KEDCO from a revenue standpoint and a job creation standpoint and a new business development, along with expansion. Thank you.
Thank you. And potentially valuable in a couple of ways. And one that, you know, it's an area that sort of fits with the core mandate, but helps to kind of diversify the funding away from the local taxpayer, in a sense, to look at other people who may foot part of the bill. I have a couple of people here who haven't commented yet, and then I'll come back up to the front. Ma'am?
I've had an opportunity to work in economic development as a profession for 25 years across the province, and so my comments are from that perspective. I live in Kingston. I want to see Kingston continue to invest in economic development. It's an investment, and I think it's something that we need to keep in mind. I think we need to balance that short-term and immediate transparency that people want with longer-term accountability. The relationship building, attracting businesses, helping to grow businesses, things that take time. So something that appears on a balance sheet or an income statement this year may not pay dividends for a few years, so we need to keep that in mind as we develop the accountability framework. Another point I wanted to make is just looking at the success of tourism here. I think one of the reasons our tourism approach has been so successful is because of the leadership of the business community involved in tourism development. So I, for one, would like to see the business community to continue to have a leadership role in economic development in the community. So those are my comments, and again, please keep in mind the longer term investment. This is an investment, and I think the City of Kingston needs to continue to invest in economic development.
Thank you very much. Don?
It's going to sound very personal, but up till now, I believe that the tourism function of KEDCO has been a closed door, and I'll give you some examples. In the early 90s, I invented a thing called the Blue Belt, which is because we're surrounded by fresh blue water. It gives rise to the finest water lifestyle in North America, and I can prove that to you. I took that to KEDCO, and it was shot down after I'd spent $10,000 on it, went out the window. In 2012, at my own expense, I produced 12 historic commercials about this city. I put them on YouTube, and I got a letter from Google YouTube saying that you have the fastest growing history website in the entire world. It had over 1 million viewings in the first 30 days. I have never had a call from KEDCO. Can we use your commercials? Can we see them even? Nobody cared. Last year I wrote a book on 40 reasons why this is the best place in Canada to live, work, and play. I've never had any response from KEDCO on that. Thank you. I am Canada's leading authority on tourism marketing, and I can prove that to you 10 ways from Sunday. I cannot even get through the door under the old regime, okay? It was a blocked door. And so I'm very resentful of that. I can help immensely. Anybody that knows me knows I am the cheerleader for Kingston, especially the tourism side, and from the history side. I'm an expert on that too. I spent 15 years studying this upside down and sideways, and the door is slammed in my face every time. I was threatened with a restraining order of not to come in this building because I was trying to help them. So I'm breaking the law by being here. And this is bullshit. It's crazy. It's insane. It's insane. So if I sound bitter, I have a lot of reasons to be bitter. You know?
Thank you. And Don, you and I had a chance to chat for a few minutes before we started, and I understand that expertise. I know you have it to bring to the table, and I'm hopeful that as we move this process forward, they'll be tapping into you and others like you in the community. Comment here, and then a couple more here.
Listen, I have a comment, and it's not for you guys, because I know you guys are taking the brunt of it. Maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't. You're all basically new. I know you are to some degree. So, you know, the other people are the ones that should be accountable also. That's number one. And number two is, if KEDCO does bring business in, just move out of the way for a second, because I got these counselors. Sorry about that. If they bring business to the city, I don't know whether you have or you haven't. We have a lot of red tape at City Hall. A large amount of red tape at City Hall. You know, you got to do this, you got to do that. Oh, you can't do that, you can't do this. The only thing that City Hall has done, which I thought was dumb, and I'm using dumb again, is build the K-Rock Center downtown. That was dumb. That was real dumb. And now they're getting all the parking spots are going to be taken up by high-rise. So, number one, I do commend you all for being here and taking the heat. But I would like to have some type, and I'm sure everybody does, of a report, even an interim report. What, pardon my expression, the hell have you been doing? That's, you know, an interim report so that we know. And to you two counselors, take it back. Too much red tape. I know there has to be a certain amount, but wow, there's a lot of red tape. I can't even build a garage because there's so much red tape.
Thank you very much. I have two more hands here, and then what I might propose, again, three more? Three hands, and then I'll suggest that perhaps we can wrap up the formal part of things. It'll be in about 9:15, 9:20 at that point. People will be available for further discussion, where nobody's going to run out the door at the front end of the room. So if we can do that, is that okay with everybody?
Can we not have comments from all of the review members?
Yeah, we'll give them an opportunity as well. Okay. So first of the final comments over here.
I have a question for you, Brock.
Okay.
Can you ask my question so that maybe I get a response?
Okay, I will take back the question of accountability to the committee, I promise. And I think the committee members have heard it pretty loud and clear, so if they don't raise it themselves, I'll make sure that they do.
It's a really political answer, thank you.
I'm one of that group who has also decided not to become a politician after this evening.
Is it okay for a reporter to ask a question? I just have talked to a number of people in the audience, and I just wondered if anyone on the board could talk about one of the biggest concerns, which is the fact that there are board members on the committee and the acting president. And so I'm asking it on behalf of the number of people I've spoken to who that seems to be a predominant concern, and I would just love to hear the answer. Thank you. That's it.
I'll perhaps offer up a quick comment from the outside perspective, and then maybe give it to the co-chairs to share a thought. I think one of the things that's helpful as we look at this is understanding what the organization is thinking about certain issues. And having a couple of board members there, it's 2 board members, that can be helpful in terms of giving us that inside perspective on why decisions have been made in the past, what they were attempting to accomplish, and what the internal repercussions of certain decisions have been made. There's been discussion about how, sometimes mistakes don't lead to anything, and I think we need to ensure that we have access to some of the information about those kinds of questions. So I think from a practical perspective, there is a role to play. In terms of that larger accountability issue, I recognize that there are concerns being raised as well, and so I think that's something the committee will contemplate and will think about. But I'll ask the co-chairs to also take a moment to reflect on this.
Okay, thank you everyone for actually sharing all that with us, because if you didn't share that with us, we wouldn't be able to deal with it. So everything that has been said today, I've written down as much as I can remember, and I hope everybody else has as well. They will be brought up. We will deal with them, and that includes whether KEDCO should exist or not. Okay? Some of the things that I've heard are... sorry, my name is Jeff McLaren, councillor from Meadowbrook Strathcona. So some of the things that I heard were, we need an audit of the results. We need to see the results from the activities that are being done. Transparency and accountability are misplaced. And it is also with City Council. And City Council may be responsible in that part. These can't be just buzzwords. We have to actually make them mean something. Tax revenue is all that matters. We must make tax revenue increase so that it goes down for everybody. It was also suggested that we look into RFPing the management of KEDCO. Buzzwords again, we have to explain what they are, how they are, and how we benefit from them. KEDCO must not be led by KEDCO. It should be independent. The audit statements have to have more info. There has to be return on investment. It has to be clear. We have to answer why, where, when, and how with regards to the return for investment. We need to see the details. We need to see contrary opinions. If we don't see contrary opinions, then it's all a sham. There was an allegation of a threat at one point of a lawsuit. We really should look into that. We should have asked questions of Kingston first at council, and I have to apologize for not having thought well enough ahead and prepared enough for that. We really should have asked questions when Kingston first presented. And if any of you are willing to talk to me now or afterwards, I also make myself available at the Chit Chat Cafe and would be at the Frontenac Mall on Sundays from 4 to 7, or from 4 to 5, and I can make appointments with any of you at any time if you'd like. I hope that can help to smooth that out, and because we are sorry that we didn't ask questions, we really should have. Additionally, we got to get the community involved. We have to go out into the community. We need to form community associations. We got to get measurables every day of the week. Everything needs to be scored. We need focus, we need discipline, we need to be proud of the scorecard whether we fail or succeed. It was commented we should separate tourism. We need entrepreneurial mindsets. We need to show if there was any misuse of funds. We must avoid duplication, especially with tourism. We need quality jobs. We need to know how this committee can be objective. Do we have a conflict of interest? I would hope that if any of us have a conflict of interest, that we would step down from this committee. I personally don't believe I do, but if anybody thinks that I do, please talk to me about it. And if I think you're right, I will step down. I'm told that we will be judged on the outcome. Thanks to you guys today, we are at your judgment when we come out with this report. If it doesn't suit your purposes, if it doesn't suit the best interests of Kingston, then we will have failed. And we are at your judgment. So understand, I hope we understand this because we are the committee and we have been charged with this. If we can't do that, then we're failing. But we also need to hear from you again. And I hope that this is not the only town hall meeting that we're going to have. I hope we have several more throughout the city and at different times of the day so that we can get many more people. Investment in tourism is good, it was also mentioned. Shutting down KEDCO is an option. If it weren't, then if you hadn't brought it up, then it wouldn't be an option. So thank you for bringing that up. We will consider that and we will make recommendations. Trust. We can't be trust the review committee. We need to build trust. We need to open the books. Again, I'm hoping that I can build trust with you guys, and we'll definitely consider opening the books because that is something that has been a concern of mine for a very long time. Is the money well spent? What has happened to it? We want reports that can be understood by normal people. We want to see what is the return on our taxes. Tourism does a great job, we were told. We need to know what we are looking for. Too many coffee shops, not enough high-paying jobs. Somebody else mentioned separate tourism. we need to keep graduates here with good jobs, not coffee shop jobs. Is KEDCO the solution? We need to consider this. Are the presentations objective? We need to deliver on our promises. We need to be accountable. Employees of KEDCO need to be accountable to their clients. We need to use the tracking tools. And if we do properly, that might justify KEDCO. We need to get measured. We need to find good companies and grow them. We need to find good companies and find out how to bring them here. We need focus and clarity. We should freeze all hiring. Get rid of the KEDCO board influence. And that will be something we must consider, I guess, at City Council. Consider industrial land development and selling land. How can we take time to invest in economic development? Sometimes it takes time. We need to get help from local experts, especially when it comes to blue water. The red tape at City Hall, and which we will be taking back to Council, thank you. And we need to report on what we've seen. If we don't meet all of those things, then we'll have failed. And I hope that you understand that we are going to look at them, and we're going to look at them seriously. Thank you.
There was a request as well that other committee members have at least the opportunity to add a comment. Is there anybody who'd like to add? I think Councillor McLaren's done a great job of summarizing a lot of the input. Judith?
My name is Judy Hay. Yes, I'm very proud. Oh, sorry. I don't need a microphone because I was a teacher all those years. I'm a very proud citizen of Kingston. When I applied to this committee, I was honored to think that I would have a voice, that I have something to bring to this group. I have a long history in education. I sat in on 3 district reviews with ministry and board level and school level staff on site. I feel I have a lot to offer to this committee. Can you trust our committee? I've just met these people for the 3rd time. We've spent long hours speaking and hearing and learning. We had a lot to learn as a committee. Can I trust these people? I do. And I want you to trust us as well. I think Jeff did a great job reviewing all the information. This is very early days. And we have, I think, because we came to you so early in the process, I'm hopeful, even though we may make some mistakes, I'm hopeful that because you've given us such great information, and there's always input on the website, our minutes are on the website, you're welcome to every one of our meetings. I'm hopeful we'll see some change, but I feel honored to be a part of this group, and it's a hard-working group. And some of the stuff I know that we heard was difficult to hear, but sometimes we have to hear difficult things in order for things to change. Thank you.
And I promise we'll... Donna, do you want to share a quick thought on what you've heard today?
I'm very grateful for everyone taking the time to come out. I know I often strive to make town hall meetings, and after a long day, it can be challenging to fit life and family in with civic duties and civic interests, so I do appreciate the time and investment it takes to come out. I think all the comments are well taken and do need to go back and be looked at by the review committee. And some aspects we need to look at immediately, operationally, of how we can address. We continue to strive to provide more information online, and I know, speaking with some people in the audience, need to look at other ways of communicating better, because not everyone's tech savvy or likes to go on the website. I'm really grateful for the staff that are working to ensure that Kingston is open for business, and I know there's been very valid questions about why we're currently in a recruitment process for some positions, but we're striving to make sure that no call goes unanswered and that we can respond to inquiries. I don't think the question of KEDCO being shut down is off the table in any means. That's something that the committee's tasked with looking at. Economic development in Kingston will continue, and we want to make sure as a group that we have it set up with the best model in the best position to do that. So I really appreciate all the questions that were put forward, and I know I learned a few interesting anecdotes from people in the audience that will certainly be looked into. But again, thank you.
And just in terms of a formal closing, I also want to add thanks. This is not the only opportunity there will be for input. We're at the front of this process. We appreciate all the time that each of you have taken to be a part of this discussion this evening. There's been a lot of great, frank, useful information put on the table. We will do our best to absorb, internalize, and reflect on that as we move forward. Some of you submitted questions on these cards. These will also make it to the full committee and be part of the discussion as we go forward, and there'll be additional opportunities for input as well, including the availability of any of those committee meetings that are coming up for delegations. If you're with an organization, you're an individual who wants to come and make a more formal presentation, those opportunities exist as well. And many of the committee members, as Councillor McLaren has referenced, are available even one-on-one to sort of talk about the issues as they come up. I do just want to say thank you very much. It is a significant amount of time that most of you have spent here this evening, 3.5, 4 hours for some of you as you came in early for discussion. And we really appreciate the effort that you've made to help us understand the issues that we need to wrestle with. We look forward to hearing more from you over the course of the process. So thank you.
I'd just like to thank you for your presentation.